Nigel Farage.
This general election has become farcical. Every morning, billions of pounds being offered, showered around like confetti. They're trying to bribe you with borrowed money. Now, UKIP has come up with a fully costed, verified plan that shows we can cut the taxes of working people in this country to bring about real economic prosperity. And we do it by cutting the bloated overseas foreign aid budget, our contributions to the European Union. Let's take back control of our country, take back control of our borders, put in place an Australian-style point system to control immigration, and take on the big corporate giants who've driven down salaries and made life so difficult for our 5 million small businesses. It's only UKIP that is prepared to talk straight. I'm not frightened of upsetting the very politically correct class who were afraid to touch difficult issues. No, we'll tell it as it is. And I have a feeling that I'm the only person here saying what a lot of you at home are really thinking.
Which our panel here, of course, do not know. The first question tonight comes from Charlotte Dennis. Charlotte.
As someone about to enter the job market, do you think it's fair to increase government spending, like so many of you plan to do, when my generation will be left to pay off the debt?
Nigel Farage.
Well, Charlotte, you're quite right. And what nobody wants to talk about, and it's a great shame that David Cameron is not here, is that in the last 5 years, our national debt has doubled from 850 billion to 1.5 trillion. The interest repayments on that are already bigger than our current level of defence spending, and that's with interest rates at rock bottom on the floor. So you're right, it is not fair because we are burdening future generations. All I can say is, listening to the promises that I've heard from the people here tonight and the other two who went somewhere else this evening, is they are going to drive us into even greater debt, frankly bankruptcy for your generation. UKIP is the only party to come up with a credible plan by cutting our foreign aid budget, by cutting our EU contributions, by stopping white elephant projects like HS2, and by recalculating the Barnett formula so that less money goes over Hadrian's Wall to Scotland. We can save £32 billion a year. And if you ally that to tax cuts and growth, UKIP is the only party with a plan to get this debt down.
Leanne Wood. And your sums don't add up.
Well, our sums do add up, and very interestingly, Ed, we're the first political party in the history of this country to have had our manifesto promises independently verified by an economic think tank. You obviously haven't read the manifesto. You should. We haven't proposed tax cuts for the rich. This is not the right time to do that. Now is the time to take the low-paid on minimum wage out of tax. Now is the time to help the squeezed middle, to give people incentives to go to work, to make that gap between being at work and being on benefits bigger. And I have to say, this talk of austerity from you and all the others, please, 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 can we remember this year we are borrowing £90 billion more. Our national debt is £1.5 trillion. We have a real problem here. And I haven't heard from you, Ed, a single cut that you would make. Not one.
That's wrong, Nigel.
Well, tell me.
Well, I'll tell you.
Tell me how you're going to balance the books.
We've said that for pensioners with incomes over £42,000, we'll take away the winter fuel allowance. That's a difficult decision.
Yep.
We've shown how we can save hundreds of millions of pounds in local government, in policing elsewhere. But I just want to take issue.
I
want to take issue. With this
point. Let me bring one or two of the others in. Ed Miliband, Ed Miliband, hold on a moment. Let me bring in Nigel Farage, and then I'll come back to you.
I've offered cuts of £32 billion a year that will not affect our public services. Ed has offered peanuts. And as for the rest, Charlotte, back to your question, you're going to be paying for this lot for a very long time to come.
Please.
As a working single parent of 3 children who privately rents my home, I'd like to know each leader's thoughts on the lack of affordable social housing throughout Britain and how their party means to tackle this housing crisis.
Nigel Farage.
Well, like all markets, housing is about demand and supply. One of the big problems we've got is we have to build a new house every 7 minutes in this country just to cope with current levels of migration. So a rapidly rising population has put massive pressure on house building in Britain. Reducing immigration helps, but it doesn't solve the problem. There is a chronic lack of housing. What UKIP proposes is a brownfield building boom. Let's establish a brownfield register. Let's help people with decontamination grants to build on that land. Let's offer incentives such as no stamp duty on properties that are built on brownfield sites. By doing those things, by using empty government buildings, and there are plenty of them, we could produce 200,000 new, affordable homes in this country every single year. But it's something we're going to have to start doing very quickly, and we should make sure that all new social housing is for UK nationals only. There just seems to be a total lack of comprehension on this panel, and indeed amongst this audience, which is a remarkable audience even by the left-wing standards of the BBC. I mean, this lot's pretty left-wing.
Hang on a second.
But very interesting.
Hang on a second.
When you talk
Nigel,
about
let
housing,
me just say one thing.
Yeah.
This is an audience that has been carefully chosen, not
Very
by the
carefully.
BBC, not by the BBC, but
Yes.
by an independent polling organisation to represent the balance between all parties.
It's never a great idea.
Very good.
So
Very good. Very good.
anyway, carry on.
I think it's very interesting.
It's never a great idea to attack the audience,
discuss,
Nigel, in my
discuss.
in my
No, the real audience are sitting at home, actually. You cannot discuss.
Hang on.
That's
Let him
fine.
have his say.
No, that's fine.
Go on.
Remarkable. We are talking about a market, folks. I know none of you have ever worked in business, but we're talking about a market. And markets are about demand and supply. And I just wonder, I'm curious, could I get any recognition from any of you that the demand side of this equation is that a rapidly rising population due to open-door immigration, started by Ed Miliband's Labour Party in the late 1990s, has directly contributed towards the housing crisis. Is there any flicker of recognition from any of you
on that for the moment?
Yeah. Just astonishing. I mean, if you cannot accept,
yes.
if you cannot accept, if you are not worldly enough to accept there is a demand-supply side to this equation, then I'm very sorry.
I want to come back.
I'm very sorry.
I accept demand and supply. I simply don't accept that all of the demand bit of it is down to immigrants.
When the population goes up, when the population goes up, there is more demand for houses. It's not difficult, really.
Natalie Bennett. Nigel Farage, this stranglehold of the big developers, do you agree with him?
I don't disagree with that for one moment, which is why I want a brownfield revolution. But, Ed, if you have net migration into Britain running at 300,000 a year, that's 300,000 more people that need somewhere to live. And the point I'm making is that, I mean, our plans would be, with the brownfield revolution, for 200,000 homes a year. But even that isn't enough unless we cap the demand side of this equation.
Okay, let me respond.
Without letting you into the secret, we may be coming to that. But that's 2 down and 3 to go. Let's have our third question. It's from Inaya Shanane, please.
With increasing instability on the world stage, can we really give up Trident and allow defence spending to fall below 2% of GDP?
Increasing instability on the world stage, can we really give up Trident and allow defence spending to fall below 2% of GDP? And Nigel Farage, it's your turn by lot to answer this one first.
Yeah, I have to say the answer is clearly no, we can't afford to. I do agree with you. If we look at North Africa, we look at the Middle East, we look at huge tensions in neighbouring Russia, the world is in a very dangerous place, perhaps a more dangerous place than it's been at any point since the fall of the Warsaw Pact. It is astonishing that we saw the last government run down defence spending. Nobody thought that a Conservative Prime Minister would run the British Army down to the size of 82,000, and they still won't commit to 2%. In fact, from what I can see, almost nobody is prepared to commit to 2%. I think we should commit to 2%. I think we need to go back to 2010 Manning levels, and Trident, expensive though it is, I'm afraid, is a necessary thing to have in the modern world. I would also like to see us spend just a little bit more money looking after our ex-servicemen and women who've come home from repeated conflicts and not been looked after properly.
Okay. Statements now. Nigel Farage, do you find yourself in a measure of agreement with Ed Miliband on this, Trident and the 2% of GDP spending?
I do. All that slightly worried me was that Ed thought that perhaps we should be using the EU for defence. Now, it's absolutely clear Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, has said they are building a European army. And we've got a bit of a choice to make here. You know, we've been with NATO, we've been with that group of countries since the late 1940s. The EU clearly is now in a position to attempt to usurp it. And I just wonder, Ed, would you sign us up to a European army? Because that is where EU defence is going. And I think it's important, I think it's important that we do not. Well, but are we going to have a choice on this?
No, I think it's no is the answer.
So are you saying that if 27 countries push ahead and form a European army, that you as Prime Minister will keep us out of it?
Yeah, there's not going to be a European army. But look, let me explain.
But there is going to be a European army.
No, there isn't. Let me explain.
Hang on. Last year, hang on, Ed. Last year, I was on with Nick Clegg. He said my talk of a European army was a dangerous fantasy. We now have the bosses of the European Union, including the French President, saying they want to build a European army. You can shake your head all you like, but actually this is happening. And if it did come to a European army, would that be enough for you to give people a referendum?
I'm not going to have a European army, but let me explain. I think I've said that a number of times.
I didn't quite get the 6% bit, but no, surely 2% isn't very much. We should think of it rather like paying the premium on our home insurance. You know, we very much hope there isn't going to be a fire next year, but if there is, we better be insured. And I very much doubt, with our defences where they are at the moment, that we will be capable of defending ourselves, and certainly, if one of our dependent territories, such as the Falklands, was to face a problem again, we do not have, at the moment, the military capability to do anything about it. To ask for just 2% of our total spend to be on defence, I don't think is asking for very much.
All right, thank you very much. I think we'll move on to another question. And this one comes from Leon Matthew, please. Leon Matthew.
Immigration has put public services at great risk. What are your plans to deal with this?
Immigration has put public services at great risk. What are your plans to deal with this? Nigel Farage.
When you lose an argument in politics, you tend to resort to abusing your opponent, and we've seen quite a bit of this towards UKIP recently. The fact is, Leon, you're right. A massive increase in our population means we've got to find another 250,000 primary school places by 2020. It means we have fewer GPs per capita than any other country in Europe. We were in no position to cope with this massive rise in our population. What to do about it? Well, we have to be honest, and we have to say, if you're EU members, you cannot do anything about the numbers coming to Britain. My plan would be to have a trade relationship with the EU, to be good neighbours with the EU, but not to be a member of a political union, to take back control of our borders, and to put in place an Australian-style point system, so we can choose the quantity and type of people that come to our country. We would no longer discriminate against people from India in favour of Eastern Europe. It would be a fair, ethical policy, and it would work. The fact there are some very good foreign doctors and nurses that work in this country is not the point. It does make me, of course, ask the question why we're not training more of our own nurses, but isn't the point. The point is that health tourism to this country costs us a very great deal of money. People in government have to make tough choices. And if the choice is that we increasingly say to people, particularly older people, we cannot treat you for breast cancer, we cannot treat you for prostate cancer, we haven't got the money, whilst at the same time we allow people to fly into Britain who have got no link with this country and contributed nothing to this system, but we're prepared to give them the drugs for being HIV positive. You then get yourself to a situation where you ask yourself a sane question. Is the job of the National Health Service to look after people here, or is it to be an international health service? And I can assure you, whatever you may think on this panel, the vast majority of British people want this to be a national health service.
A lot of time in the first debate, but Nigel Farage, do you want to come in?
I just want to say that I think Ed is trying to defend a record that wasn't all that good, really, was it? You were the guys that brought the big private equity boys in to the National Health Service and privatised a large chunk of it. You were the people that saw the massive growth of MRSA. You were the people that saw presided over the Mid-Staffs Hospital. But my question to you, if you become Prime Minister, will you run a national health service, or will you continue it to be an international health service? And that is what voters want to know.
Well, I'll answer you directly. Look, there are rules in place and they've got to be enforced so that when people come here from other countries, we collect the money from them. But Nigel, the thing you've got to answer is this, because people at home need to know this. You don't want the National Health Service. You want a private insurance system of healthcare. You've said it on the record. You've said you want to...
And just to carry on something that you, Ed Miliband...
That's your real agenda, and you'll support
David
Cameron with his plans to privatise the National Health Service.
Ed Miliband...
We have not... No,
you cannot conduct this debate.
Nigel, can you just pause a moment? We're not debating the NHS. All right?
Well, I'd like to answer
well, you can have one brief answer, and then we must move on.
Stop lying. UKIP believes in the National Health Service, free at the point of delivery. It was you that privatised a large chunk of the health service, and you're lying, and you're lying to millions and millions of people, and you keep on doing it. And lying won't win you the election.
You made the point. All right, you could, of course, if you've been accused of lying,
Natalie wanted
to
come in, David.
What kind of deal would you be prepared to enter into in the event of a hung parliament? And before I ask for the first statement, I should state the obvious, Ed Miliband, which is, of course, you are aiming for an overall majority. So save us that bit.
The question this country faces is whether it's an independent, self-governing nation or not. And it's interesting to note that even the nationalists believe in being members of the EU, therefore they don't actually believe in true independence. We can't be an independent state and be part of a European Union. My view is we should be outside of that. My view is we should govern ourselves. My view is we should be self-confident and reach out to the world. So for me, if UKIP is in a position of influence in the next Parliament, we would want the British people to have a full, free and fair referendum so they can decide whether we have a trade deal with the EU or continued membership of the European Union. And it's a mystery to me that the Labour Party, which used to be the party that actually believed that the EU would be bad for Britain, now won't even give the British people a referendum. I'm astonished by that, but that's what I believe is the most important thing UKIP in Parliament could fight for.
I think our viewers will have an impression of what you both think on that issue. But Nigel Farage, what about you and the Tories, who they're trying to keep out, all four of them?
Well, as an observer, it'll be impossible, I think, for Ed Miliband to be Prime Minister without Nicola Sturgeon's 35 or 40 MPs. And that is something I think very deeply concerning to a lot of English voters. They're very, very worried about the Scottish tail wagging the English dog. I'm not sure that's what we're going to finish up with. Well, that's the reality. Scotland is 10% of the House of Commons chamber, but may well, in coalition with Ed Miliband, lead to a situation where we continue with the Barnett formula, because Ed has promised to keep that. So I think English voters are worried about that. My view, David, for UKIP is this. I would happily say to you that UKIP could have worked with a Labour Party that believed in the British people having a say on the greatest constitutional question of the day. They've turned their backs on it. The Tory government...
Sorry, you would have supported Labour if they offered a referendum on...
If they had offered a referendum, we could have done business, but they've turned their backs on the British people.
That is the only issue for you. None of the social issues, not the NHS, not education,
The only issue is, do we govern our own country and control our own borders? And Mr Cameron, having repeatedly refused a referendum, now says he'll have one. Our job will be to have an honest one and not a stitch-up.
Nigel Farage.
I believe the gap between our career, professional, political classes and ordinary people has never been wider, and that's been exemplified this evening. They basically aren't very different at all, and they're not prepared to stand up and fight for ordinary folk in this country by confronting the tough issues. I am. I'm unafraid to say what I think, and whether you agree with everything I say or not, know that when I say it, I do so because I believe in it. I'm patriotic. I believe in this country. I believe in the people of this country. I believe we'd be so much better if we governed ourselves, controlled our borders, and gave ordinary workers a chance against the takeover of the giant corporate companies who've now basically taken over our political parties. I'll fight for the little man, for the little woman. I'll fight for this country. This is the chance for the most radical political change we've seen for decades. Vote UKIP if you want things to change.
Thank you.